This is a production of Cornell University.
All right, come on in, folks. You can come closer to me. You're welcome to check out the plants. You're welcome to check out the soil as well. I'm going to start. So first I want to talk about what is a high tunnel. I don't think we haven't given that enough attention. A high tunnel is a greenhouse, but it's a greenhouse that sits on soil. Why would we do this? Why would we grow cannabis indoors? Well, inside of a high tunnel. So this is a marriage between field production and greenhouse production, fully automated greenhouse production. So what I'm going to share with you reflects off of some of what our economic speaker had this morning, John Hanshar, as well as our greenhouse speaker, Neil Matson, shared around fertility in a soilless setting. This is a soil setting. So how about comments from the crowd? Why would I grow this inside, in the soil? Any ideas? A lot easier. Easier than, say, hydroponics?
We've got it at home. It seems easier.
It seems easier. That's the comment up front. Anything else? Why else would I grow this inside? Yeah. Light, and what was the first thing? Free sunlight. And so that's one of the biggest things. In agriculture, if we're going to spend money on any input, whether that's a tractor, a fertilizer injector, a bag of fertilizer, or a greenhouse, we have to ask ourselves, what does that input provide for us over field production? So high tunnel production provides a couple advantages over field production. One of those is earliness. So we can plant indoors a crop like hemp probably 2 to 4 weeks earlier than we would plant it outdoors. So something that's photosensitive, in other words, responds to the length of day, getting it in earlier, when in this part of the world our days are longer, earlier, we're going to probably have more branching and more foliar biomass. Our total yield's going to be higher. Any other reasons we grow inside?
Keep the water off at the end of the year.
Keep the water, that's a great idea. So now I've got a rain cover, which is a good thing. Also has some challenges with it at harvest time. I could also probably skate through a frost or two in the fall. Maybe I can pick up 2 to 4 more weeks in the fall by growing indoors. Anything else come to mind? That issue of input cost, that's something I would really encourage you to think about in terms of the benefit you're getting from the crop relative to the investment that you're putting into it. Compare that to field production, compare that to greenhouse production, compare that to the grow dome that we're going to look at one point. And then you can begin to make decisions on what you're going to do. Those are some of the benefits of growing inside. I think in all likelihood we're probably going to increase our total cannabinoid production by growing indoors on a per space unit. Since we are excluding rain, we have to think about the condition of this soil. So if everyone looks at the soil, they've done a great job. Savannah's done a great job of almost getting rid of all our weeds in here. And we've got this open space between plants. Can you folks see some white residue on the surface? You can reach down and pick some of that up. Any ideas on what this is?
Salt.
Lime, this is correct. Salt, that's also correct. So since we don't have any rain in here, we have no leaching, natural leaching of this soil with rain or snow over time. And certain inputs tend to build up over time. One of them is calcium. And if you remember from Neil's talk this morning, most groundwater in upstate New York is high in calcium. And it really is dissolved lime. So cannabis needs calcium. That's not a problem. But too much of a good thing is not a good thing. And so what we find is as these levels build up over time, other nutrients are restricted, particularly phosphorus and potassium inside of high tunnels. So managing a high tunnel soil, first and foremost, we got to think about how are we going to address that issue of calcium in the soil, in the water. Any thoughts on that? Neil gave the answer this morning. Lower the pH. How do you lower that pH? Yep, sulfuric acid. If you're interested in a more organic approach, citric acid, which is a slightly weaker acid, is the acid of choice for organic production. While we're talking about organic production, You cannot grow hemp in a organic sense in a hydroponic setting. To be organic, your crops need to be in the soil. So this is one of the primary advantages of a high tunnel. It allows us to be organic, but we receive a lot of these benefits of the greenhouse structure. This high tunnel doesn't have any heat in it. We could put heat in here too if we wanted to and still call it a high tunnel. That'd be just fine. Okay, so we're going to address calcium by adding some acid. We also want to think about this soil as our primary bank of nutrients, or how that is going to deliver nutrients to our crop. In the system that Neil showed this morning, we're able to pulse out nutrients in a parts per million manner to that hydroponic crop in a greenhouse. Beginning, maybe we're at 150 parts per million in, and then we creep up to 200, and then we back down to maybe 150, 100 ppm nitrogen. We can take that same approach here in a high tunnel. That's perfectly okay. The plant has the same needs. However, we have to look at what else are we putting in with that nitrogen. So if that nitrogen is coming in an organic form, is there phosphorus with that? Is there potassium with that? Is there calcium with that? And if I'm chasing nitrogen at a high level to get the biggest, bushiest plant I can, am I over applying those other nutrients? There's a very good chance you are. So growing in a high tunnel, the first thing you want to do is test your soil. And there's a number of labs that can help you with that soil test. Once I get that soil test back, I'm looking at nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and our micronutrients. Then I can make adjustments to those. If I don't take those levels and I continue to fertilize this crop to get my maximum yield, I'm probably going to over apply something. That's not a problem in year 1. It's generally not a problem in year 2. By year 3, we have excess levels of certain nutrients like phosphorus, magnesium, and calcium that begin to restrict yield. And we decrease the longevity of the high tunnel. So we want a soil test. That's extremely important. Neil also shared this morning that there are labs now with sufficiency ranges for our foliar nutrients. So after we've taken a soil test, we can now do foliar sampling throughout the season to make sure that we're staying within the sufficiency range for the plant. In other words, how good a job are we doing providing a fertilizer to this crop, and how good a job is the plant doing to take it up? pH is, as noted earlier, is probably the most critical factor there. So testing. We test our soil. We test our plant. One more thing we need to test, and I'm not talking about the flowers. That's our water. We have to have a water test as well, primarily looking at pH and dissolved calcium or calcium bicarbonate. When I have those 3 tests, I can begin to formulate a fertilizer program. If I want to do this in an organic fashion, I'm probably going to front load that fertility. In other words, I'm going to fit this soil in the spring, and I'm going to apply those nutrients early on because I have less soluble nutrients available to me. If I'm going to grow this with conventional fertilizers, I can spoon feed these crops just like they do in hydroponics with smaller doses throughout the season, injecting it through this drip line that you see right here. I'm going to go to questions, comments, thoughts. Yeah, up front.
Do you amend these beds at all with anything before you put it in?
Do we amend these beds with anything at all before we put the crop in? We should. We take a soil test and we should amend based on any deficiencies we find in the soil ahead of time. I don't know if Savannah can hear me or is in. So I would ask Savannah if she did amend these or not. She's too far away. But I would. Go ahead.
Would you consider this, second on, would you consider this a living soil?
Would I consider this a living soil? I consider most soil living. And so you're hitting on an important point here, which is the microbial health of the soil. And again, a major difference between hydroponic production and high tunnel production is this soil. And the nutrients that we may apply there in a chemical sense depend on a microbial, really a whole ecosystem there to mediate that transfer of nutrients into the root system. So if it's not living, I'm basically in hydroponics even though I'm in the soil.
Yep.
Savannah, did you want to tell us what you amended with?
Yeah, I believe it was 19.5 or 4, 19.5 or 4, or 19, I can't remember if it was 19.5 or 4, but at 100 pounds in per acre. And then you'll notice some of the plots, like this plot, have a bit of a white tinge to them. That's because we apply glufosinate, which is a silicon crystal to the soil to try to control the powdery mildew, and I'll be talking more about why we did that later on.
Okay, so that's not calcium, that's one of your treatments?
Yeah.
Okay, there's my timer. So one of the things we do in high tunnels to maintain that microbial life that was mentioned up here in the front is that we promote cover cropping in the wintertime, and I have a research program around that. So once these plants come out of here, we could sow a cover crop, a legume or a grain, allow that to grow in the cooler months, and then incorporate that. And there, in a sense, we're feeding our microbes and ideally providing some long-term fertility to the crop. If you go to the OCM webpage, you'll notice that they strongly encourage cultivators to use organic practices. So if you're strongly encouraged by OCM to use organic practices, how are you going to do that in a hydroponic setting? You don't have to answer me. Just think about it. Deep water culture. Okay. Any other comments or thoughts? Questions?
What are your handles?
What are my handles?
Make you an influencer, Judd.
Oh, yeah. I'm at Judd Reid. Judd Reid, J-U-D-R-E-I-D.
I just tweeted out that Judd Reid is giving sage advice. You have to follow him. So.
Thank you. That means I'm getting old if I'm sage.
Damn right.
Yeah. Now, yes, another comment here.
Do you orientate these wind tunnels with the wind or cross?
Yeah. So these high tunnels, the question is about orientation and on the compass we're talking about here. What I would suggest is generally orienting on a north-south orientation. This crop is growing in a time of year where we want, the sun is pretty far north, as far north as it gets in New York. And if we are north-south, the sun's going to go overhead and you have no fixed shadows. Each one of these overhead supports, if this was oriented east-west, in a sense becomes a fixed shadow if the sun is traveling directly overhead east-west. So north-south on a single bay like this. That's my suggestion.
Do you ever move them?
Do we ever move them?
Seems like you could put wheels under them and, rotate that way a little.
Yeah, these things do get moved, and there are versions with wheels. There's a manufacturer called Rimmel, R-I-M-O-L, that will sell you those. My experience is, so if we move them, you get away from these soil problems that I'm talking about. Those models do tend to move, sometimes in directions we don't want them to go. They're a little bit less fixed to the ground. But if you do move it, you can maintain soil health easier. Move it every couple of years. Yes, in the back. There's a gentleman behind you, and then you. Yep.
Some people take their plastic off in the winter for a couple of years to wash the soil. So that's the way to do that without having to go in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The second question was, you didn't make it composting. So are you trying to get a compost to your soil?
Yeah, so a comment on removing the plastic. Removing the plastic does allow a winter's worth of precipitation to come in. That's great. It's very hard on the plastic to do that. Most greenhouse plastic really it comes with a 3-year usable life. Now, if you're farmers, when I say 3, you're hearing 4, and some of you are hearing the word 5. What I would suggest is, at the end of those 3 years, that's the time to remove the plastic and give it that full season of leaching. The second question was, or comment was about compost. Compost does a couple of things for us. It is an organic source of nutrients, and beyond nutrients, it also provides some carbon for soil life, and it provides physical structure to the soil as well. Most compost does not have a balanced set of nutrients in terms of what we're looking for. So if someone is going to use compost as their source of nitrogen, their sole source of nitrogen, they're going to grossly over-apply other nutrients. And you get away with it for a year or two, but not much beyond that. Yes, there was a... Go ahead.
Do you know what the PSI is in here, or how long or how often you're running the drip line?
The PSI in the drip line. Savannah, you want to do that, or you want me to do it? Good.
I believe we have a pressure system. It's at 10 PSI, and we had to do a lot of fiddling around with the irrigation system in here just so we weren't overwatering, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on today. But we irrigate this for 15 minutes 3 times a day at this point, every 8 hours. and that's seeming to work well for us. So.
John, can we go back to the compost?
Yes, compost question.
I've seen a lot of growers make their own compost using a lot of wood chips, heavy carbon materials.
Yep.
Talk about some of the disadvantages of that.
Yeah, so Janice has a question in regards to compost that might have a lot of wood chips in it. Those wood chips are basically carbon, and it's great to get carbon into the soil. Once that carbon goes into the soil, the microbes that are there generally want to break that down. When they do that, they're going to compete with our plants, particularly for nitrogen. So over-applying woody compost can lead to a nitrogen deficiency in your crop. That's the short answer on that. Yes?
Getting back to the watering thing, you said 3 times a day for 15 minutes. I know some plants benefit more from kind of drying right out, heavy watering. Is that true with hemp, or do they prefer smaller, more dispersed waterings?
Do you want to do that, Savannah? You want me to do it? Yeah.
We're
Still working it out. I actually would disagree with their approach of going every 15 minutes in 3 times a day. Plants don't need water at night. Plants need water most when they're under photosynthetic stress. So in other words, what is their peak workload during the day? That's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So for me, I would approach a more thorough watering probably mid-morning with the following rationale. If I can apply water to a greater depth of this soil profile, I'm going to promote deeper rooting. If that plant roots deeper, it's more likely to access some of those hard to get micronutrients and other macronutrients that I might be struggling to get. That's me. I don't have a lot of science behind that. That's just my experience. Yes?
I was wondering the same thing about the watering. Watering at night, does that promote powdery mildew?
Does watering at night promote powdery mildew? I don't know, but there's no good reason to water at night. I'll say that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Want me to answer that?
Yeah, please do. Chris Smart.
So powdery mildew, unlike all other diseases, likes dry leaves but high humidity. So if you water at night, you're gonna bump up the humidity when the air is cooler, and it can absolutely promote powdery mildew. But I agree, there's no good reason to water at night.
Well, it's almost 12 o'clock. Some of you may be hungry. I'm hungry. There was a question about my handles on social media. It's Judd Reid, Judreid.
Are you in front of a little yellow tree? Is there like a yellow tree?
Yellow tree? That's not me. That's the other Judd Reid. There's a guy, he's like in a rock and roll band. That's not me. I have professional accounts on Facebook and Twitter. My Instagram is like pure rainbows, kittens, and sailboats. You're welcome to follow me there. That's my personal page. I think we should wrap this up. Is there an organizer present that's going to direct us to where we're going? We're going back where you were for that the first 2 hours of the day, George and Paul. Yeah, Daniela.
Yeah, I'll walk people over.
Daniela's going to walk people over. She's this in the red shirt and the amazing pants with the Panthers on them, and also she is our emerging crop specialist. Come inside, Daniela. La magnifica, la única. Daniela Vergara. Daniela is our emerging crop specialist, and she's really taken a lead on hemp production in New York State in terms of being an on-farm presence and helping to move the industry forward. Thank her. She put a lot of work into this today, in addition to Larry Smart's lab and other people. And she would love to learn about what you're growing and how you're growing it and where you're growing it. So please chat with Daniela. And she actually is an influencer. She actually has a good Twitter handle. Kana Bacana on Twitter, and she's got a good Twitter page. Thank you. Thank you. Let's eat lunch.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.